All right. Well, hello again, everyone, and welcome to Navigating the U.S. Job Search for International Students. My name is Jake, and I work at the International Center, and I'll be kind of starting the presentation off and then turn it over to some colleagues. But before I do that, I first wanted to mention a couple things. So I just mentioned that this presentation will be recorded, and the presentation slides and recording will be available on the International Center's website, and I'm providing the link in the chat right now. You can have access to the slides right now if you want to refer to them as we're going as well, because there will be some links in the slide that you can click on. And the second thing that I wanted to mention too is that feel free to use the chat function if you have any questions. We will have time for Q&A at the end. So if we don't answer your questions when you answer them in the chat, just be patient and we'll get to that at the end. So yeah, as I mentioned, my name's Jake and I'm a program advisor at the International Center. I'll pass it over to my colleague, Joelle.
Hi, everyone. My name is Joelle Fendero-Randall. I use she, her pronouns, and I work at the University Career Center. And I'm going to be connecting with you all about putting together an effective strategy for a job and internship searching.
I'm John Prescott, one of the International Student and Scholar Advisors in the International Center. So work with our international students navigating employment options and work authorization applications. And my focus will be certainly, of course, on that piece of your job search on the work authorization side, particularly focused on OPT as the tool to get started in your work in the States following graduation.
Hi, my name is Ugo Buzzi. I'm a faculty and staff immigration advisor here at the International Center. My primary work is really not with students. It's really, or I should say, with graduating students, much like some of you. And we work on H-1B cap exempt employment authorization for employees the university wants to hire, as well as permanent residency and some other options, E3, H-1B1, and so forth, TN, to obtain employment authorization for potential employees to work at the University of Michigan. So I'll be speaking about primarily H-1Bs today.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. And then before I turn it over back to Joelle, I just wanted to mention a couple things about, well, I guess, so the US job search might be similar to the job search in your home country for some of you. For others, it might be drastically different. So because of that, we've included links to 4 different articles that can help you navigate the cultural and immigration issues that could arise during your job search. So the first link is Common Cultural Barriers to the Job Search. This can be things like maybe for some of you, talking about your own accomplishments in an interview can feel like unnatural or uncomfortable, but in the US, things like that can be totally acceptable. Also, things like making direct communication in interviews and stuff like that, like maintaining eye contact or making direct responses or is kind of seen as important to the US, where in other cultures it could be seen as rude or disrespectful. So basically that article gives different types of cultural tips in the job search. Next is an article on how, why, and when to share your immigration status in job interviews. So recommend you take a look at that as well for some useful tips. Next is different types of interview fashion or grooming tips. Like gives different recommendations about how important making a first impression can be in the US. And then it also talks about the importance of dressing professionally, even if you are doing a virtual interview. So those are some useful considerations as well. And then the final article gives career boosting strategies for international students. And this gives recommendations on doing things like learning some practical skills, even if it's not directly related to your field. So practical skills like writing or different types of computer skills can be useful for just giving your career future a boost. Also gives recommendations about different types of ways to network, such as volunteering, where you can build different types of skills that you might have not already had. And then also it encourages connecting with your local culture. So, and this can include, many different things, participating in different events that the International Center holds, such as this or other social events, different events that your academic department holds, or even different campus or like Ann Arbor community related events. So just some things to think about as you're doing your job search. And then just one other slide about some useful resources to consider. The first is the English Language Institute. They offer different courses, counseling, advising, and have different events and programs for international students. So they are a great resource to utilize on campus, and they have like a different area of expertise than the International Center does as well. So they do like complement our office quite well. So definitely look into them if you're interested in what services they have to offer. And if you're specifically looking for writing related services, the Sweetland Center for Writing is also a great resource to utilize on campus. And then later on this semester, the dates haven't been announced yet, but we will have H-1B and permanent residency related events that will be similar to the information that Ugo talks to you about today. But just know that later on this semester, I'm thinking probably late November to early December, we will be having these workshops. So I do encourage you all to keep an eye out on our website or our newsletter for when we promote those events. All right. And that is it for now. I will stop sharing my screen and transfer it over to Joelle.
Great, awesome. Thank you, Jake. So I will share my screen right now. If folks want to give me thumbs up, can you all see my screen? It should say, all right, putting together an effective U.S. job search strategy for international students. So I have 15 minutes with you all. And so without further ado, job searching is so much more than just writing a resume and sending it out to a gazillion employers. I feel like I work with a lot of different students, anywhere from first-year students all the way to PhD students. And I think a lot of time people put so much energy in just their resume, but it's so much more than that. And so today we're going to focus on 4 areas. So to be more effective in your approach to job searching, we're going to talk about number 1, know yourself, know what you're looking for. Number 2, understand the U.S. job search, employers' expectation, maybe some cultural norms if you're job searching within the U.S. Develop an appropriate job and internship search materials and approaches. So that might be our resume, cover letters, interviewing. And then number 4, execute, persevere, and always have an alternative plan as well. And so we're going to kind of process through those. But before we do that, it's going to be very important that you thoroughly familiarize yourself with your visa and employment authorization. Understand employers' hesitation with hiring a potential international student, and be prepared to educate potential employers as needed. And so we do have different topics on how to talk about your status with employers, and those are separate programs. So we won't be diving into that a ton, but we will, we do offer opportunities for that. And so I know for myself, something that's really helpful after every program, I always take notes, but I just want to name, Jake mentioned PowerPoints. There also will be this handout where any of the resources I'm going over, you'll have access to this as well. So just want to be transparent. If you just want to be a sponge and take this information, it's all going to be in this handout right here. So visa types and employment authorization, the International Center, boop, boop, does a fantastic job. And there's wonderful resources you can leverage there. But why, this question I get a lot, why U.S. employers are often not receptive to hiring international students. And this is important for you all to know about. Companies' policies may restrict their ability to hire an international student. Companies may not even offer OPT knowing that they're not able to eventually hire an international student. H-1B requires application and legal fees for several thousands of dollars paid by a hiring department. Companies may also have to prove there is not an equal qualified U.S. citizen for a certain position for permanent residency. And if companies are need to downsize, they may have to they may have to terminate a foreign employee before they can lay off any U.S. employee roles. So those are just some barriers. I think it's important to name those. Also, there is a wonderful tool from InnerStride, U.S. Employers Guide of Hiring International Students. We work with employers and we educate them on the wonderful values and great talents that you all bring to the table as well. So I just want to name that. And there's some helpful, relevant resources. But we're going to focus on number one, knowing yourself and know what you're looking for. I really like color coordination, so you're going to see that that's consistent. So knowing yourself, what you're looking for. So what I mean by that, what are your skills? What are your strengths? What can I offer an employer? What problems can I solve? So this is going to be really important for you to take some time to really reflect on that and take some practicing time to articulate that as well. What are you looking for? What are those industries you're thinking of? And what is the function of the job? So for example, I may be interested in doing marketing for an engineering company, but the industry for an engineering company would be engineering, but the job function would be marketing. That's just an example, just to help you all kind of process that. And then learn your visa rules, work with the International Center. They are wonderful humans and here to help you through the process as well. I also think this is read intentionally. Start early. Your search will take longer than you may think. Sometimes I work with students that are like, I graduate in a month. We need to start planning way in advance. So I just want to name that as well. Here's some really great tools. Again, this is going to be on the handout. If you're not sure about what skills or talents you may bring, we have some assessment tools that you're welcome to leverage. ONET is a wonderful tool. The UCC career tracks, this breaks down some information about industries. And so to get there, you just go to join career tracks. And we have a list of very popular industries we see students go into, and we've done a lot of research for you there. Your employment authorization, and then the University Career Alumni Network. If you go to our main website, you go to UCAN, this is a great networking tool where alumni have said, yes, I want to be contacted by students. And you can also filter alumni that were international students, which is really powerful to talk to them about their process as well. So again, that first slide, this first section was knowing yourself, what skills, what industries you're kind of thinking of or job functions. Number two, understanding the U.S. job market, as well as employers' expectation and cultural norms. Grades alone are not enough. I think that's really important to emphasize on your experience. Your co-curricular engagements, if you're involved on campus, can really set you apart in a positive way. Also, those skills and traits, link them to your personal background and maybe connect them directly to the employer's needs. You have to do what's important to you. You have to self-advocate, initiate, and network. And I know networking for me, when I first started, I was like, I'm not sure how to do this. We can set up a networking appointment and process through that. Networking, I like to reframe it for students. Networking is about building relationships, authentic relationships, versus I'm only reaching out to you when I need something. You really want to lean into that. Networking is about building relationships. And then understanding the U.S. business communication and professional etiquette through email. We also have some really helpful tools for cover letters, as well as like how do I format in a business format as well. And so some of these that I highlighted can be really helpful for you. Again, you're going to get these resources, but competencies employers are looking for. I know I mentioned co-curricular. Say you're not involved on campus yet. That's okay. You can go to May's page and check out those organizations. I know I focused on UCAN, but there's also LinkedIn and beyond. So if I go to LinkedIn, you can actually see this direct link. These are where all the alumni are. If I click alumni, and you can filter, say you're thinking of, oops, sorry, I don't know why that looked really odd. Let me move it back. There we go. You can see where people work, what they where they live, what they do, and then what they studied, what they're skilled at and what they're studied. So say you're thinking, okay, I want to go into economics, just making this up, but I want to focus on finance. And then you can see all those alumni, which is helpful. You can do this as well. So I just want to name that. Handshake is where you can see the postings. Handshake is open to all students, anywhere from first year to PhD students. And so this platform is really going to be helpful for you. You can also see what employers are open to OPT or CPT and work authorization. So that can be a really helpful tool for you. Handshake is one of my favorites. And then InterStride, yay! Cheers for this. This is brand new this year. As an international student, InterStride is a fantastic tool that you can leverage. You just log in using your credentials, and you can filter various jobs, employers that support H-1B. And also there's really fun webinars with the focus for international students. And so my colleague Rachel sends out bi-weekly emails and typically promotes InterStride on there as well. Non-work study jobs as well as another way to look at opportunities. Fluent U is business English, really thinking about those communication skills. And then professionalism in a job and internship, we have a couple etiquette pieces and tools that you all can read a little bit later. But I do think, again, these are going to help you understand the market and the culture within the US. So I feel like I see there's a couple of questions in the chat, and they are not ones that they've been answered. Great. Awesome. I just want to take a pause just there for a second, just to make sure if anyone had questions, I can answer those. So the other approach is number 3. So developing those appropriate materials and approaches. And so I think developing a resume that's targeted to that industry or the job function really sets students apart. I think that can be really helpful for students versus a generic resume that has everything that you've ever done. It really should be one page, really focused on the skills that that job is looking for. And then also understanding how applicant tracking system works. On our website, when you go to our resources, you'll see resumes. That application process tracking system is actually really interesting. Sometimes students get caught up in the system and actually just because of the formatting of your resume. So make your resume ATS friendly. We have a video and things that you can kind of process and look at your document and say like, oh, did I format this? Because sometimes it's not, you spent a lot of time on your resume, but the format is what's causing you not to move forward in a process. And so that's a lot of larger organizations are starting to use this, where it's not someone looking at your resume. It's just it's a application tracking system. So I just want to name that and learn to tailor your cover letters. So I know my first cover letter was a funny one. I didn't know what I was doing. So you are not alone if you're not sure where to get started. We have some tips on our website. Again, this is going to be on the handout, but the first paragraph, second paragraph, and third, your second and third paragraph are really showcasing your talents and why you're a good fit for the position. The first paragraph's more about the company. Finals, like, thank you for the time. We have a template system using Lettersmith that can help you build it. Definitely leverage that, y'all. It makes things so much easier for you, and it coaches you through the process. And you can also always schedule an appointment with us if you prefer that as well. And then here's some samples. So cover letter, definitely tailoring those. And then develop your professional community. Woo! So one thing I know is that network. So I am going to go back to UCAN because this is where I put some time to kind of show you and model what UCAN looks like. So again, anyone can access this. This is the University Career Alumni Network. You can go to browse and let's see. Question about a cover letter. Are we supposed to have a header like a image on a cover letter? No, you do not have to have a header or an image within that. Thank you so much for that's a really great question. So if I go to browse, again, this is UCAN where you can network with folks. You can filter based on major, industries, location. So again, I think your job search or internship process will take a little longer. You can always do a dual search both in your home country as well as in the US. I think that's a great strategy. But say you're interested in aerospace. That's a very unique lens. We have over 232 alumni. And then there's even more filters. This is one of my favorite parts. So I have an invisible identity you all don't know about. I'm a first generation college student. And so these are optional for alumni to select. So maybe I want to talk to aerospace alumni that are first gen, as well as you can filter ethnicity and race. International refers to our international student alums. So I think, or alums, sorry, international alums. And so you can filter as well, and you just push apply, and then all those folks will come up, which can be really powerful. So there's 13 first gen alums that are in aerospace. I'm going to clear all. So that was just the card view. There's also the map view. And so I do want to share this because I know there might be some regional areas that you all might want to network in. And so you can see the world in just a second. It takes a little bit sometimes to load. So I will preface that. But you can see like in Michigan, obviously there's a lot of numbers, but as you scroll out, let's say I am wanting, sorry. If you zoom out too much, it will duplicate the world, which we all know there's just one. But say I'm really excited to relocate back to Italy. Oh, I don't know why I kept doing that, but you can zoom in and see those alumni and do those filters. Sorry, trying to go across the pond. Here we go. I don't know why it keeps doing that. I personally prefer the card view, but you are welcome to look at that. And you can also do the location if you're doing the card view as well. So just want to share that with you all as you're kind of looking at UCAN as a tool to help you build your network. Again, UCAN and LinkedIn are great, stellar tools for you. And then I think the other thing is, how do you stay organized? Because you may be applying to 20 plus organizations. And so I think building a target list of employers in an Excel document is a great approach. The positions you pursued, please, this is a fun fact for you. My first job, I forgot to download the job description, and then it disappeared once the job was applications was done. So make sure you download that, because that's going to be really helpful for you. And then understand, like, keeping track of your application status can be really helpful. If you are someone that needs like a helpful Excel document, already a template, if you will, again, these are resources that you'll have when I email you, but we have this really cool tool if we go to for undergrads, searching for jobs and internships. We have one, staying organized. We have a template that you can use, a free spreadsheet template that you are welcome to use. So I just want to name that. Whoa, sorry about that. Also familiarize yourself with interviewing format. Sometimes there's behavioral based questions where it's like, tell me about a time where you had to deal with a conflict. So thinking about past experiences, how you navigated those. And the STAR model is a great one to kind of practice, where you present the situation, what task or action you took, and what was the result. Sometimes there's case interviews where they give you a case and they want you to kind of see what best approaches are for that. That's typically in consulting. We do case interview prep sessions as well. You can sign up through that through Handshake. And then there's technical interviews where it's going to be like, here's this algorithm, I need you to update this. The other thing too, friends, is I know over the past 2 years with the pandemic, a lot of employers shifted to virtual. Virtual interviewing is not going anywhere. I do think that we are seeing employers both do in-person and virtual interviews. And so I know everyone has different comfort levels of those. We do mock interviews, both in person or virtual. And then we also have big interview where you can practice. And so I'm going to show you some of those, the big interview tool. If we go, sorry, I'm scrolling. If you go to interviewing, that was pre-health. Sorry about that. Click. You can see, scroll down, big interview. You'll see the brand. You can actually record yourself and it'll time you. You can also specify what industry or job function you want to do. It's a really great tool that's free to you all. Definitely encourage you all to practice that. We also have the International Student Resource Identity Focused Toolkit. And so once you go to that, we have a breakdown of interviewing preparation, global internship search, graduate school as well, adjusting to the US culture, and preparation and searching. So all these tools are here for you. We update this every single year. So definitely check that out. I mentioned appointments for mock interviews. We also have internship labs as well, where we focus really on an internship strategy for you. VMOC is best for undergraduate resumes, but VMOC, if you want your resume reviewed within 2 to 3 minutes, it will review it and then give you a score. And then you'll be able to make suggestions. We also have a resume lab as well. Target resumes based on the industry, you can upload that. And then this is that video I showed you on our website of learning more about the application tracking resource system, which is the ATS for short. So those are some helpful, relevant resources. Lettersmith was the cover letter one I went over. Big interview, which I always think, I'm like, you have a big interview coming up, practice with big interview. I know that sounds maybe cheesy, but I definitely think that can be really helpful for you. The English Language Institute resources, they have wonderful things too. If you just want to practice, they have conversation tables, fantastic team over there. And then the non-academic job search resources for PhD students. I know there might be some PhD friends in here. We do one-on-one appointments for PhD students as well as our undergrad and master's students, but there's some really great tools for PhD students, because I think assessing your skills and reflecting and knowing those resources can be really helpful. So I only have my fourth section, friends. We're moving through this, but execute, persevere, and always have an alternative plans as well. So take the time to schedule your search. It's an ongoing process. Don't wait to hear back from employers before pursuing an option. I think that sometimes I've worked with students and they are like, well, this one person said that they could move me through, but that's not guaranteed. So always maximize your opportunities. Leveraging your network and adjusting your approach accordingly, asking them for advice, the community of the alumni. I think a lot of you may have heard, oh, Michigan has a robust alumni network. And so I showed you a little bit about how we can connect with those alum. So someone asked a question, other than levels, FYI, is there a way to view reliable stats on average salaries offered in a company? And so I will talk a little bit about that. I'm going to make that a note to come back to that. So I will come back to that, but I'm going to finish going through my number 4, if that's cool. I know you can't give me thumbs up, but I'm going to come back to your question, I promise. So I mentioned networking. Networking can also help you learn about salaries as well. Maybe not your first interaction with someone, but asking them like, hey, after you build a relationship and if you feel like it's appropriate, you can sometimes ask that, but not in the first conversation. Remain flexible and open to possibilities. Revisit salary negotiation using work authorization rules, but also make parallel plans in your home country and globally. So salary negotiation was my 4th bullet. So I just wanted to get to there and I can show you those pieces, because some of it, it's like you don't know what you don't know. So we actually have an evaluation in negotiating offers. We have some salary research tools to kind of answer your question. Glassdoor, there's researching job titles, and sometimes people will be anonymous and just share what their salary is, so you can compare that way. LinkedIn, you can research salaries on that as well. NACE salary calculator, I really like this one because you can specify what industry, job function, where your degree is from, the multiple degrees you may have, and populate that. So I definitely think that can be extremely helpful for you and is a way to benchmark that. I know I mentioned earlier in networking, again, this was if you have a trusted relationship with someone and they may share with you, you could say, I've been researching the salary using these resources. Do you have any other suggestions? I just want to make sure that I understand what typical salaries may be for this geographical area as well as job title. And then salary expert cost of living data. That can be really powerful if you're relocating to a region you haven't lived in before, can be really informative. So if you're not sure how to negotiate, definitely schedule an appointment to talk to a career coach. Those are 30-minute appointments, but do your homework before that, research to see like, is this a competitive salary I'm getting offered? So my friend that had that question in the chat, I believe I answered it. So you can kind of see that range based on the company, or you can see based on your degree and credentials as well, which can be really powerful as you lean into that. So I mentioned UCAN already. I wanted to take some time. How to use the LinkedIn alumni tool. I modeled that for you all. myvisajobs.com is another fun one. internationalstudents.com, U.S. Department of Labor. Going global. So say you want, I'm making this up, I want to look in the US, my home country, and the UK. I've never lived in the UK. You can look and see on Going Global, what are some of the best practices and strategies in the UK? How to negotiate salary, 37 tips you need to know. Again, this is going to be on your handout. Glassdoor, I've mentioned, and global job resources on our identity toolkit for international students. So I'm getting a little parched, just kind of processing with you all. So to summarize, my 4 areas I really wanted to focus on with you all today was to know yourself, know what you're looking for, understand your visa and US job and the US job market, employers' expectations, cultural norms, develop appropriate and job and internship search materials. So that's our cover letters, resumes, and those approaches, and then execute and persevere and have alternative plans as well, I think can be extremely powerful for folks. And then additionally, I just want to name that the International Center, they are coordinating this wonderful program, wonderful members there of their team to help you through that process. And so one thing that's great to know, the next bullet, is we are the University Career Center. We serve all students. We're the centralized office, but you also have a school or college career services office team as well. And so if you go to hireblue.umich.edu, you also have 2 offices that you can leverage. So it is a bonus added in my eyes, and we collaborate really closely with all the different teams. And so it's really great to know that you have 2 career services teams really helping you in this process. And then our identity toolkit, I think, is one of my favorites. We update it all the time. And we have different videos too that we update and add in some of these links that can just be really helpful for you if you're not really sure where to get started. And then we had some specifically during the pandemic. We're still in it, but just some really helpful things. And then this is InnerStride, the tool that I mentioned that is new. It's a very powerful tool. And one of my colleagues is an international student and has been using InnerStride as well. And she shares that it's really easy to use, and she really values it to kind of research those companies and know what's going on in those spaces. So I'm wishing you the best in your search. I know it is a process. And so I hope you all can scan this QR code portion here if you want to tell us what you thought about this section of the program. I really value feedback. I think it's a gift and I don't take it lightly. So I just want to name that, that it's important. So wanted to pause for just some questions that are geared towards the strategy piece. I know we're going to pause on the recording just for a few minutes. My goal was to leave about 10 minutes for questions, but if you all don't have a ton of questions, that's fine too. So Jake, I know you were going to pause the recording.
Okay, thank you, Jake. Sorry about that. I accidentally muted myself. Excellent work as always by Joelle, kind of queuing up really good concepts and practical tips on the job search process and networking and sort of strategizing your approach to well, as asked in the chat, both the internship search and job search post-graduation. And I would kind of start with a note of encouragement, even though, you know, there's a lot to the job search, and it really does behoove you to start early and plan ahead and be thorough and be strategic. And then you have this whole other layer of the immigration part that we're going to discuss. So it can seem like a lot, but you can do it. You will do it. And we have thousands of students right now as we speak who are on OPT, working in the US following their graduation, getting great work experiences, great jobs, great internships. We process hundreds and probably thousands of CPTs each year. So the proof from my perspective is in the students that we see semester in and semester out, year in, year out, who continue to navigate this process and make good use of the F and J employment options. So I do want to give you that note of encouragement and just perspective from having worked with international students for a while that you know, it's a lot to digest, but you, with our help and with Joelle's help, Career Center, your career advisors, your goals are there and are attainable. So to start, I mean, most of what I have prepared to discuss is leaning more towards employment authorizations after graduation, kind of with an eye towards you've completed your academic work and you're pursuing full-time employment in the States after your graduation. But before diving into that a bit, I do want to make note and recognize that you have a variety of options prior to graduation to obtain work experience. The first that's worth pointing out is on-campus employment. And if you could use the chat, do you know how many hours per week are F or J international students eligible to work on campus? How many hours per week? Cool. Yeah, great. Thank you. Prizes to the first three. Jake will have to figure out what those look like, but yes, 20 hours per week is the maximum number of hours of on-campus work. Now that's during the fall and winter semesters. If you're in the middle of your program, have not yet graduated or completed your program, you can work full-time on campus during the spring-summer period. So that's one popular and common area where you can get work experience and employment in the US is on-campus work. Graduate students, GSRA, GSI, or any number of other on-campus positions at all degree levels. CPT is the work authorization category for F1 students pursuing internships or work off campus. So it's not on-campus employment, but off-campus experiences, or perhaps you're even working remotely in Ann Arbor, but it's with an off-campus employer. CPT would be the F1 category of work authorization during your program of study. And OPT is a reference to F1 work authorization after your program of study. Now we listed it on this slide because technically there's a kind of OPT that could be before graduation, but it's unusual and not likely. Typically CPT would be your path. Then I don't know if we have in the audience any J1 student status holders. If you're a J1 student, which is a quite small number, the 95+% of students are in the F category, but Mateen in the chat, thank you. And we certainly do have some J1 students. So worth noting and naming that academic training is the mechanism for and the authorization sort of type tool for J1 students to apply for work authorization for off-campus employment. It's similar to kind of the J1 equivalent of CPT prior to graduation. My goal is to give you just a taste and to give you an overview and to give you an outline of these topics. There's certainly not enough time today for me to get into super fine grain level detail on these. So we have a note on this slide that says, for detailed descriptions of these categories, please visit our website. So I would invite you to do that, to take a deeper dive into any of the topics listed on this slide. But we'll talk more in detail, particularly about OPT in a couple minutes. So we can go to the next slide. So yeah, so the first slide was kind of referencing employment types prior to graduation and then after graduation. So working in the States after you complete your degree. If you're an F1 student, then OPT, there's a couple different types that we'll discuss, would be your mechanism. If you're a J1 student like Mateen and wanting to work in the US directly following and continuing and leveraging your student immigration status, academic training would be the mechanism for a J1 student. And I see Alice has a question in the chat, which I'll get to in a couple minutes when we get to the F1 OPT section. So taking a very brief look at the J1 in greater detail, I've referenced a couple times now this term, this phrase, academic training. So that's the immigration terminology specific to the J1 student immigration category. For students to apply for authorization to pursue work training or practical experience, it has to be directly related to the student's major. It can be either before or after the completion of their study. There are specific rules which dictate the total bucket of time available for academic training. Generally speaking, 18 months is usually the cap. However, there's some exceptions, and the most common exception is for PhD, when students have obtained and completed and been awarded the PhD degree, they may qualify for a total of 36 months of academic training, 18 plus 18. Visit our website, Mateen, and other J1 students for sort of the nitty-gritty details of applying for academic training. You do need to have a job offer, written job offer in advance. So it necessitates that you've already obtained an internship or full-time job offer. There are specific details that need to be listed on the offer letter. And it's important for J1 students to plan ahead, especially for post-completion academic training. The way the regulations are written for J1 students is they need to really have applied for and received academic training before the very, very end of their graduating semester. So it's a bit more time sensitive than the OPT category in that way. It's not necessary that you immediately start academic training like the day after you graduate, but there is an expectation that academic training for post-completion purposes is applied for in advance and will start shortly after the completion of the degree. So I would say for any J1 students, certainly academic training is your tool for pursuing off-campus employment either during or after your degree program. And do visit our website for sort of the fine-grained details, and then visit with an advisor in the International Center for clarifying questions or to kind of fit your situation into academic training if you have clarifying questions. So after graduation, if you're in the F1 student category, the mechanism to work in the US is called post-completion OPT. And so that would be the type of work authorization that you would apply for and use for up to 12 months directly following the completion of your last semester. There's some strategy considerations we'll get into in the next slide, but in real broad summary, it's a 12-month post-completion OPT is that 12-month authorization that would follow within a few weeks after, or as early as one day after your final semester, or as late as 2 months after your final semester, you'd start this 12-month period. The work that you do in OPT, during OPT, has to be directly related to your major field of study. That's an important detail. It's not a blanket work authorization to accept any form of employment. It does need to have a direct link to your major. And the mechanism for sort of requiring that, or the way that that plays out in practice, in a practical way, is that students on OPT are required to report their employment to the International Center, and as part of your employment reporting, you'll be required to include a description of what your principal job duties are and how they directly relate to your major field of study. We then take that information and put it into your formal CVIS record, your immigration record. So it's important that that link exists, and that you articulate that link, we receive it, and then put it in your CVIS record. In addition to the 12-month post-completion OPT, there are possible extensions for more OPT beyond 12 months. One is called CAP-GAP, and you'll hear more about the H-1B from Ugo. But if there's a student who's currently on OPT and that OPT period is ending, let's say in May or June or July of a given year, if they're successfully sponsored for H-1B earlier in that calendar year, like April or May, and let's say their OPT expires June or July, if the H-1B is filed for the student before their OPT ends, there could be an extension of OPT to bridge the gap between the end of OPT and the start of H-1B. That's called CAP-GAP. A lot of acronyms. Apologies for that. In the work we do, we just constantly flows CPT, OPT, H-1B, but it is what it is. So the other common category, more common category of extending OPT is something called the 24-month STEM OPT extension. I'll be saying more about that in a few minutes. Very briefly stated, the application process for OPT involves gathering information, gathering documentation. We require a training on our website. You'll have to ask for the International Center to issue you a new I-20 before you can apply for OPT. That takes a couple weeks. And then when you're actually ready to apply for OPT, the application itself is like, it's an online application with the US government. So we're helping you with the process, but your application is not with the International Center. It's actually with the US government, called USCIS. Their processing time right now is roughly 2 to 3 months. So it is important that you plan ahead, accounting for that processing time. By the way, CPT and academic training, I referenced those earlier. Those do not require government adjudication involvement. You're not applying with the US government for academic training if you're a J1 student, or CPT if you're an F1 student. So those take a couple weeks processing time and are fully handled by the International Center. I have a question in the chat, if I could just jump to that super fast. There was a question, if an F1 student has done some OPT before graduation, would this reduce how much OPT they have after graduation? If a student did do what's referred to as pre-completion OPT, which is quite unusual. We have very few in any given year, but yeah, it's possible if someone has done pre-completion OPT, then that would reduce the amount of post-completion OPT available. So that is true. So for example, if someone did 4 months of full-time pre-completion OPT, they would have 8 months remaining of post-completion OPT. The use of CPT, which is much more common prior to graduation than pre-completion OPT, use of CPT does not reduce the amount of OPT available. Now, some of you may know this. If you do prior to graduation, if you do 12 months or more of full-time CPT, if you do 12 months or more of full-time CPT, that would forfeit your eligibility to apply for OPT. But any amount of CPT that's less than 12 months of full-time CPT would not impact, would not negatively impact eligibility for OPT, post-completion OPT. Alice asks, how can I find out if I did OPT or CPT? So they're very different application processes. CPT is an application filed directly with the International Center and requires 1 to 2 weeks processing time. We issue a new I-20, and on page 2 of the I-20, it would say CPT, and it would have the start date and end date, whether it's full-time or part-time, the name of the company or organization where the work is affiliated. OPT, much different in that you are filing paperwork, application forms, a $410 fee, and submitting all of that to the US government, and then waiting 2 to 3 months, and if approved, receiving something in the mail called an EAD card. The EAD card represents OPT approval, and the validity is based on the dates printed on the EAD card. So my hope, Alice, is that for you and other students, yeah, it should be pretty clear as you look back at your immigration history. You should be able to pretty clearly differentiate or delineate between OPT and CPT based on if you had an EAD card or not, if it was, you know, what page 2 of your I-20 said the category of work was, etc. Oh, great. So, and forgive my accent, Lee, the question that followed is a perfect transition. Let's jump to the next slide because this is all about strategy and timing. And Lee's question, I think, asks about some of these strategy considerations. So this is some of our favorite work, at least for me, day-to-day work in the International Center is really digging into the detail with a student on what's their situation and, you know, what's the best way to approach applying for post-completion OPT. So you can apply for post-completion OPT up to 90 days before your I-20 completion and up to 60 days after your I-20 completion. Now, when referencing your I-20 completion, keep in mind that the dates on your I-20, that the end date of your I-20 is designed to reflect when you complete your final requirements and final enrollment in your degree program. When you are first issued an I-20, typically they're issued for kind of a standard period of time, often 4 years at the undergraduate level, 2 years at the master's, 5 years at the PhD. Now there's some variation, so it's not always that way, but just keep in mind the dates on your I-20, the end date in particular, that you may have on your current I-20, that was an estimate, a best guess made by the admissions office when you were first admitted. You may end up completing your program before that date, or you may end up needing more time. By the way, if that's the case, make sure you apply for an I-20 extension at least a few weeks before the expiration date, because you need to extend that if you need more semesters of enrollment beyond what was estimated and is visible on your I-20. But that date is not set in stone. So I just wanted to make sure you're aware, if you graduate early, if you finish early, then when I'm talking here about 90 days and 60 days, I'm referencing what is the final term of your enrollment and program completion. But let's say for Lee, just to get some purchase on this, let's say Lee or other students on this call or on the Zoom are completing next semester. So not fall, but let's say winter. The I-20 end date for a winter 23 completion would be, I'm using the chat here, would be April 30, 2023. That would be the standard I-20 end date that we would use for someone finishing in next winter term. And so when you can file the OPT application, you can apply for OPT as early as the first week of February, which would be just about 90 days before the end of April. And then you can apply in March, you can apply in April, you could apply even in May or early June. We tend to not recommend waiting too long after your I-20 completion date and your final term to start this process. Because remember, it takes at least 2 or 3 months processing time. And although you'd be allowed to remain in the US while you're waiting for the OPT application result, you know, it's not, you can't work until you actually have the authorization. So it can be kind of a period that's not the most ideal to just kind of be in the US without any work authorization for like a long time. But it is possible. So depending on your situation, you know, you could make cases for applying really early, close to 90 days before, or it could end up flowing where maybe you want to wait a little bit longer to get the result of job applications and apply once you have a firmer idea of when you might be starting a new position. So the other strategy question beyond when are you going to apply is what dates am I going to ask for? So you can apply, you can request your OPT to start as early as 1 day after your I-20 completion or as late as 59 days. So I'm going to use the chat again to give sort of a specific example. The earliest possible post-completion OPT requested dates for a winter 23 completion would be, and forgive the weird American custom here of month, day, year. You're probably used to it by now. Strange custom. But so May 1st to the following April 30, that's the earliest possible requested dates of OPT. The latest possible requested dates of OPT would be June 29 to June 28 of the following year. Does that make sense? And you can pick, it doesn't have to be on the extreme, right? You can pick a date. A lot of students actually pick dates that are roughly halfway between those two. The theory being, well, maybe I need a little bit more time in my job search, or maybe I simply want a break of a few weeks after my last semester before starting my OPT employment. But I don't want to wait 2 full months because, you know, if I get a great job offer and the company wants me to start more quickly, I don't want to have to delay and defer my joining time to the end of June. This strategy can really vary a lot, case by case, student to student. So this is where, you know, when we talk about like sort of our drop-in advising hours, for example, and I'll put a little link in the chat, just put that in there. We can certainly tailor this advising and help you think through your timing and strategy as best fits your situation. But just be aware of these considerations, and this will inform. You want to plan ahead, right? Like Joelle was saying, plan ahead on the career search. We'll definitely plan ahead on the OPT side of things too. And then just touching briefly on STEM OPT, because it is a very valuable tool in your toolkit if you qualify, and kind of first and foremost to identify and investigate if you qualify for STEM OPT. What is STEM OPT? It's a 24-month extension of OPT. So you start with post-completion OPT, that would be the 12 months. And then if you qualify for STEM OPT, it's an additional 24 months. So you could have a total of 36 available possible months of OPT. The timing of STEM OPT, you would apply during the final 90 days of post-completion OPT. So just to be clear, no matter what your major, everyone starts with the post-completion OPT, maximum 12 months. And then for those that qualify, once you're in your final 90 days of post-completion OPT, you could request the additional 24 months. There is a numerical code associated with every major. It's actually printed for F1 students right on page 1 of your I-20. So you can cross-check your major as printed on your I-20 and compare it to the list of STEM designated degrees to verify if your major is on the list of STEM OPT eligible fields. If you do have a match, and so your major does qualify, there are other elements that make up eligibility for STEM OPT. It's not only having a specific major, it's also the employer has to fit certain criteria, namely enrolled in something called E-Verify. An employer needs to be willing and able to complete a STEM specific documentation form packet called the I-983. I just put in the chat the link to the STEM OPT page on our website. So if you wanted to take a deeper dive into the eligibility criteria, you're certainly very welcome to do so. And we put in greater detail on the website each of these points of reference for determining eligibility and the application procedure for STEM OPT. But it's a nice tool in your toolkit if you qualify. So it's certainly worth mentioning in the context of today. Boy, it's a lot to plan for, a lot to discuss, but I think that wraps up for now, for today, kind of my piece of the puzzle and wanting to hit on a few concepts related to F and J on campus and off campus, before graduation, after graduation, employment options. Even in the case where a student has post-completion and STEM OPT, or maybe the maximum academic training is a J1, it's still time limited, right? You're still looking at sort of maximum up to 3 years following graduation. So next we have my colleague Ugo to discuss kind of if you continued working in the States beyond what your student status would permit, then H-1B is quite a common next step in that process.
Hello, thank you, John, for a thorough review of OPT, CPT, and the like. So H-1B is a pretty involved area. I'm going to kind of give you a quick overview of what H-1B is, and then I'm going to go into a little bit of the timeline, which is outlined here, and then move on to a permanent residency. So as a general matter, H-1B is for a specialty occupation. What a specialty occupation means is that the position must require at least a bachelor's degree in a specific area of study. Now, that doesn't mean that the H-1B is all right if you have at least a bachelor's degree in a specific area of study. It means that the position put forth by the employer must require at least a bachelor's degree in a specific area of study. Not just a bachelor's degree, it must be in a specialized area. That is often the point that people don't understand. People think sometimes, well, I have a bachelor's degree, so it should be fine. But it's not about you at this stage. To qualify for the position to be eligible for an H-1B, it's about the position description itself. Now, there's two kinds of H-1Bs that we group things into. There's, which many of you probably know this already, there's a cap-based H-1B, which is often referred to as the H-1B lottery, and there's a cap-exempt H-1B. The timeline you see set forth here primarily is for an H-1B cap-exempt position, which is what the University of Michigan files. Institutions that are institutions of higher education or governmental research institutions are cap exempt, which means that those organizations can file for H-1Bs anytime they want and for as many as they want. There is no cap on how many they can do or when they have to file for it. The opposite of that is a cap-based H-1B, which is really for all other organizations. So any private entity you would apply for a job for would be a cap-based H-1B, which would mean that the employer would have to file an H-1B on your behalf on beginning April 1st, which is when the H-1B cap window opens, usually open for about a week. Then the application would enter the H-1B lottery, and if selected, it would then be reviewed substantively to see if it qualifies for an H-1B. If it's not selected in the lottery, then you can't have an H-1B for that position for that fiscal year. They have to wait till the next April when the cap window opens up again. That's the general description and the separation between the two. I see a question in the chat that asked, if I work in the UM lab, will my H-1B for the nonprofit organization? So this is a common misconception. Nonprofit organizations are not cap exempt. Only institutions of higher education and governmental research organizations are cap exempt. So simply because the employer is nonprofit, that doesn't make them cap exempt. They still have to go into the cap. Okay. In the case of the question here, because the University of Michigan is a institution of higher education, then yes, it would be a cap exempt petition, not a cap based petition. Let's see here. So moving on to the timeline you see here, and there's a lot more to H-1B, and if you have any questions afterwards, I'm happy to answer them as much as I can. H-1Bs right now are taking about, with standard processing, 5 to 6 months to be approved. Okay, so the very first step in an H-1B process is an offer of employment. So an individual can't apply for an H-1B. Only an employer that has a business number, an EIN, can apply for an H-1B as the petitioner on behalf of an employee, the beneficiary. So the very first step is for the employee to have an offer of employment from the employer. Okay, once an offer of employment is made and the employee accepts it, then the sponsoring institution, the employer, can begin the H-1B process. That process begins with information gathering. Basically, as an example, at the University of Michigan, we send out a questionnaire to both the employer, in our case, the department that's sponsoring the employee, and to the employee requesting information and documents. Once we have all that information, we then assess the position to determine, one, if it is a specialty occupation, as I described before, that is, if it qualifies for an H-1B, and then to start to determine some of the additional things like the prevailing wage and the actual wage, which is mentioned in the second box there. That usually takes about 1 to 2 weeks for us to do. You'll see the note there, a credential evaluation may be required if the relevant degree was earned at an institution outside of the US. Now, the question is, well, we're all students here in the US, so we would need a credential evaluation. Probably not, but if the area of study that you were relying on was for a degree that you received before the degree you got here, so for example, if you have a bachelor's degree in physics and you got a master's degree here in computer science, and you applied for a job that was physics based, that is that was work doing physics, then you would have to get an evaluation for that physics degree, because that would be the area of study you're focused in. So, which brings me to kind of another thing to think about is the job that you will be doing has to be related to the degree that you received. Basically, what the law requires is that the knowledge you're going to use in that job you have gained from your academic program. And that academic program has to be related to the degree the job requires. So as I said, with the physics and computer science example, if you are going to get a job doing physics, that job must require at least a bachelor's degree in physics or a related field. It could be engineering. An argument could be made that engineering would apply. It just depends on the specifics. So moving on to the second part, wage determination. Once we have all the information and documents that we need to make our assessment, the subsequent step is to determine the prevailing wage. The prevailing wage is the minimum salary that can be paid to that for that position to employees of a similar experience and background. What that basically means is that, and that's specific to a geographical area. So in this case, in Michigan, it'd be specific to Ann Arbor, Michigan for the university. That can be done in 2 ways. One way is to submit a prevailing wage determination request to the Department of Labor. for them to determine based on the job description, the job requirements, education, years of experience, any supervisory duties, and any special requirements, what that prevailing wage is based on what occupation they determine this fits into. Right now, that determination takes about 7 to 8 months for the Department of Labor to do. At the university, for an H-1B, we rarely if ever do those because they just take too long. The law also allows us to make our own determination though. And so we take those same factors and we determine what occupation we think this position fits into based on the Department of Labor's occupations and guidelines. We then determine what level of position it is. So how much experience is required, how much education is required, and we compare it to the Department of Labor's general guidelines. And based on that, we're able to determine what that minimum prevailing wage is. So what the lowest the employer, in this case, University of Michigan, can pay you for that position. Now, can be a big difference with what John talked about in OPT. For OPT, there is no wage requirement. So the employer in OPT context doesn't have to assess, can they pay you that prevailing wage or will they pay you that prevailing wage? In H-1B, there is that requirement. Once we make that determination, we then have to determine what the actual wage is. And that is what this employer, in our case, the University of Michigan, actually pays employees in that position that are similarly employed, that have a similar background, education, experience. This requirement exists in the law so that employers can't pay foreign nationals less than they pay US citizens. So once we make those two determinations, what's the prevailing wage, what's the actual wage, we are then required as an employer, if we want to proceed with the H-1B, to pay you the higher of the prevailing wage or the actual wage, as it's noted there. Once that's determined, we are able to then file what's called the labor condition application, or what's known as the LCA. This is an application with the Department of Labor that simply certifies that we will pay you the higher of the actual wage or prevailing wage. That's filed online, and that takes exactly 7 days to come back certified from the Department of Labor. Once we have all the information we need, details, documents, and the LCA certified by the Department of Labor, we can then proceed to prepare the H-1B petition. That is, fill out the form I-129 forms, complete them. In our case, we would then send them out to the department representative and to you, the employee, to review for accuracy. Once we hear back that everything looks correct, we would then be able to file that with the California Service Center, in our case, with the USCIS. That these days has taken 2 weeks to 5 months to be approved. Now, I said earlier, it takes about 5 to 6 months. With standard processing, it's taking about 5 months right now to be approved. That varies. Last year, it was taking about 8 months. So that really varies depending on how busy USCIS is. If we file with premium processing at an additional filing fee cost of $2,500, then we will have a response within 15 days of filing that petition. So that's why it says 2 weeks to 5 months. Now, just quickly to mention a couple things, the fees. By federal regulation, all the fees and costs associated with filing an H-1B must be paid by the employer. So you, the employer, are not permitted to pay any of the filing fees or costs. That includes the premium processing fee. However, in some specific cases, there is an exception for the premium processing fee. So in some cases, the employer, or in our case, us, may allow you to pay for that if the need to be expedited really is personal in nature and not employment-based. But that's something that would be made on a determination made on a case-by-case basis. One other thing to note there, it says J-1 exchange visitors may need a U.S. State Department recommendation of waiver of Rule 212(b) foreign residence requirement. Now, I know that John had asked, and there are some on this call that are J-1 students. It's possible you may be subject to that two-year home residency requirement. If that's the case, then we cannot file an H-1B for you unless you have a waiver of that requirement or satisfy that requirement by spending at least 2 years in your home country. Waivers right now are taking about 6 to 8 months to be completed. And until we have that recommendation letter from the Department of State, we wouldn't be able to proceed with that H-1B. Another consideration for those of you that are in F1 status, if prior to being in F1 status, you were in J1 status and you had that requirement, then you would still need to either obtain a waiver or satisfy the requirement. Simply switching from J1 to F1 status does not eliminate a prior requirement that existed. So if you were previously in J1 status, you want to do some research to find out if you are subject to that requirement. Usually the Department of State will mark on the DS 2019 and on the visa stamp, that stamp you got at the consulate, if the individual is subject to the Rule 212(e) foreign residency requirement. That is not correct all the time. We do not follow that because oftentimes the Department of State is incorrect. So just because it says you are subject on that stamp, or just because it says you are not subject on that stamp, doesn't mean that you are you may or may not be subject to the 212(e) requirement. We have to do our own analysis based on whether or not you appear on the skills list for that subject area, and or whether you have received government funding of some nature. So just because it says it on the stamp in the DS 2019, you should not necessarily trust that. You should do your own independent analysis. So moving on to the next part, which is permanent residency. We can switch the slide. Permanent residency, this specifically is going to refer to an employment-based permanent residency process. Permanent residency is broken up into family-based and employment-based. Family-based would be if you have a relative, either immediate or more distant, that is willing to sponsor you for permanent residency. That would be a family-based petition. In this case, I'm speaking purely about employment-based petitions. There are several different categories of employment-based petitions, referred to as employment-based 1 through 5, essentially. The ones that you will encounter more often than not are EB1 through EB3. EB2, that's employment-based 2 category, is the one we most commonly do here and is available for self-sponsorship in some cases. I'm going to start with EB2 that would require employer sponsorship, which is what's known as a PERM, which requires a labor certification be filed. That requires that there be an advertisement and a recruitment done to test the labor market to check for U.S. worker availability. There's 2 different kinds. If you are a teacher at a university or have any kind of teaching duties, you are subject to what's called, or was called and still referred to as, a special handling permanent residency, EB2 PERM, which means that the standard is a bit lower. In that case, the employer just has to show that you are the most qualified applicant for the position. If you do not have teaching duties, then the standard is that there must not be any qualified U.S. applicants for the position. What happens there is that an advertisement is posted. If anybody who is a U.S. citizen or permanent resident applies for the position, the minimum requirements set forth for the position in the advertisement, then we can't proceed with the permanent residency. But let's move on. Say, yes, we've tested the labor market. There are no qualified U.S. applicants, or you are the most qualified for the position based on our determination. Then the next step would be to do a prevailing wage determination. As in the H-1B context, it allows you to do your own rather than filing that determination with the Department of Labor. In a permanent residency PERM context, you must file a prevailing wage determination with the Department of Labor. So the very first step, what I call step 1A, is going to take about 8 months for the Department of Labor to get back to us. Can't do anything until that comes back. Once that comes back, then we would go into drafting forms and gathering documents for that PERM. Once we have everything, there's a 30-day wait period we have to go through once we do a posting, in-house posting. That can be done during that 8-month period, though. We would then file the PERM or Form ETA 9089. That right now is taking about 9 months. So that makes up that minimum 17 months. It's a bit variable, so it can take longer, and there can be some other time in terms of gathering documents there. So we have 17 to 21 months. Now you'll see the note there that says no labor certification needed. For EB1A, extraordinary ability, that is a very high bar. That does not require employer sponsorship. For EB1B, which is outstanding professor and researcher, or OPR, that does require employer sponsorship, but that is not about the position, so no labor certification is needed. That is really more about the credentials of the employee. And for the EB2, which is national interest waiver, which is also self-sponsoring, and that one you have to demonstrate that the work that you do is in the national interest of the United States, and therefore they should grant you permanent residency. No labor cert is needed for that, so you skip the PERM portion of that. Now, once the PERM comes back, so let's say 21 months, the employer can then file what's called the Form I-140 with USCIS, which says USCIS, Department of Labor, has certified this position as qualifying for permanent residency based on US worker availability. Now authorize permanent residency for this beneficiary. That premium processing is available for that. So you could have a response within 2 weeks. It's not always beneficial to have that response within 2 weeks. So sometimes it's not worth it, but in some cases it is. Without premium processing, standard processing, that's taking about 12 months to be adjudicated. Now, the last step, which is the adjustment of status steps, which says USCIS, once you sign off on this position for permanent residency, now adjust the status of the beneficiary from H-1B or wherever status they're in to permanent resident. Generally speaking, that alone takes about a year once filed. It is adjudicated concurrently with the I-140, so it's not necessarily 12 months and then another 12 months. It's adjudicated pretty concurrently once the I-485 for adjustment of status is filed. However, in some cases, individuals cannot file the I-485 for adjustment of status. And so they have to wait until there's a visa availability. In particular, that's for individuals born in China or individuals born in India. There is a backlog of visa availability in order to file the I-485 adjustment of status or to file for a US visa at a consulate abroad. For individuals born in China, the backlog is about 4 to 5 years. It's nonlinear. It goes up and down every month, so it's difficult to predict necessarily, but it's about 4 to 5 years. For individuals born in India, that wait is about 10 to 12 years. And that's because of the number of people applying in those categories. You're thinking to yourself, holy cow, 10 to 12 years, that's a long time. Yes, it is a very long time. So chances are, if you were born in India or China, it's going to be a few years before you're able to take that final step. The one benefit, though, of getting through that I-140 filed stage for individuals born in China and India is that you are eligible for subsequent extensions of your H-1B status beyond the general 6-year eligibility if you have an approved I-140. At that point, if you have an approved I-140, your H-4 dependent can also potentially be eligible for an employment authorization document, so they could also potentially work while you wait for that priority date to become current. If you're not born in India or China, and they do go by country of birth, so if you're a citizen of another country but you were born in India or China, it still goes by country of birth, then if you're not born in one of those countries, then you can apply for it right away. One other option is if you're married to a citizen of another country, but you were born in India or China, you can use your spouse's country of citizenship as yours for purposes of filing the I-485. So that's really H-1B and permanent residency in a very abbreviated, quick nutshell application. There's a lot more information to those, but I wanted to give you an overview. I also see that there are some questions. So if it's okay, I'll go ahead and handle those questions, Jake. How does H-1B visa extend to spouse of H-1B holder student? So, all right. So as an H-1B holder, you can't be a student. You have to be a full-time employee. You could also take classes in H-1B status, but you must, let me rephrase, you don't have to be a full-time employee. You could also be part-time, but you must be employed in order to hold an H-1B. The dependent of an H-1B holder would be an H-4. H-4s are not permitted to work unless the H-1B holder is in a certain stage of the permanent residency process, as I just discussed. But the H-4 dependent can be in the US at that time, and actually technically can study while in H-4 status, although it's debatable at that point whether it's wise to stay in H-4 or go to F-1 because of the benefits of F-1 status after graduation that John talked about. How early can we apply for the perm once we get the H-1B visa? There is no requirement of waiting to apply for perm after you have the H-1B visa. You can apply for it whenever. You don't even have to be in the United States to apply for the perm, as long as you have an employer that's willing to sponsor you for it. You also technically don't have to be in H-1B status, although here we would move you to H-1B status because H-1B status is dual intent. F1, J1 are non-immigrant intent, so there could be some intent issues there, so we'd move you to an H-1B. The key here is that your employer is willing to sponsor you for the perm. There is no amount of time you have to wait. It really depends on when your employer is ready to sponsor you for the perm. From an NIW perspective, national interest waiver, you can apply whenever you decide you want to and you think you qualify. But keep in mind the immigrant intent issues that can arise with F1 or J1 or other statuses. Is a tenure track academic job or lecturing position at a university EB1B? So that is a difficult question because there is no job that necessarily says EB1B. The EB1B is not about the position. It is about the qualifications of the employee. So the petitioner, the employer would have to be able to show, based on the criteria set forth in the regulation, that the employee is deemed qualified as is deemed outstanding internationally in their field of study. And there's very specific criteria set forth in the regulation, and the employee has to meet at least 3 of those to be eligible for the EB1B. Once eligible, USCIS will evaluate how strong you are in each of those that you qualify for. So just because you're eligible doesn't mean that you will obtain the EB1B. You also have to have a certain substantive strength in each one of those. There is also technically a 3-year requirement post graduate school or postdoctoral studies in the requirement, but that does have an exception. But generally speaking, most times we don't apply for EB1Bs before the 3 years postgraduate school are up. So if there's no other questions, that's all I got. If there's any other questions, quickly put them in and I'll be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'll leave it to Jake. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ugo and John, very much for not only presenting, but answering all the questions. I do see, okay, so yeah, and others are thanking you as well. So I'll stop recording right now.